Hey, this is Reginald Perryman. Today we're going to talk about something that frustrates plenty of clients in the city of Detroit who are selling a home. And today that topic is ordering your final water read with the city of Detroit. So, plenty of clients and realtors alike sometimes find it frustrating dealing with the city of Detroit Water Department. But this process is pretty simple if you know what you're doing and why you have to do it. So, a couple things come into play. So, let's take a look here. First and foremost, the simplest process in the world. You go onto the website, you go on the City of Detroit's website, and you can actually just Google City of Detroit real estate closing bill or final water read. And what you're going to do here is you're just going to submit a request for a final water bill. If you notice here, they're going to ask for a closing date or the date that the property is sale if it's scheduled. So you want to do this prior to closing. If you do it after closing, there's a way we can prorate the bill. But here's where part of the frustration happens, right? Starting here. So years ago, the city of Detroit water bill was the account was attached to the property. Some of your bills still say current resident. That's an issue because when originally the city of Detroit, in order to get water service, you brought in your documentation, ownership, and they billed the address. And some of them just said current residence and had an account number and service address. Some bills probably were mailed to the owner and listed the owner's name, but um, that didn't mean that the owner had to provide certain documentation in order to get service in their name. Recently, within the past several years, and you this will make sense to you shortly, if a new owner is acquiring a property or even a tenant in a landlord tenant situation, the tenant has to sign an affidavit and provide information. And we'll talk about the different account numbers shortly. But whoever's going to have service connected in their name is required to have their social security number and identification at the time of connecting service. So this is important because if you are a homeowner that has an older meter in your home and you had the property years before this process was required, you're going to have trouble ordering your final water read online because it requires your social security number, which the city may water department may not have because it wasn't a requirement when you acquired your property and turned on service, right? So you can still request it, put the information in. You're going to receive an email, possibly a phone call, but usually an email if they don't call you, asking for the information and asking for some verification, like your deed to the property or a copy of the lease. Now that makes it a lot easier because if they don't have this information on file, they're just going to ask for you to verify it pretty much. So let's talk a little bit about why you need to order a final water read. All right. So a couple things are going to come up, and let me make sure my settings are set here. So a couple things are going to come up. One, um, where it's confusing is, let's say you're selling a home, you put your home on the market, say in March, right? And you get an offer on the property in May, and you're closing in June. Between March and May, you got a water bill. Let's say you got that water bill in May, you paid your water bill. And prior to closing, a week or so before closing, your agent says, "Hey, order a final water read because the title company has to hold funds in escrow to cover the final water read. So there's typically $300 or whatever held in escrow to cover the water bill." Most sellers say, "Well, I paid my water bill. There's a zero balance." Well, not actually, because the bill you pay in May is for previous service dates. So if you look at a water bill here and you look here, it's going to have service periods, right? Or service dates. Now, when you have those service dates there, what that's telling us, that's for previous usage. So the bill you pay in May is actually for prior dates. So they're going to need a bill from the date, the previous reading date through the date of closing. So let's use June 1st as your closing date. You paid a bill in May that has service dates good through, I don't know, April 15th. So the purpose of the final water reading is to cover that billing cycle between April 15th through June 1st. All right. So sometimes your closing date is going to fall in the middle of a billing cycle, is what I'm saying. And the title company needs to ensure that that period is covered. Now, here's where the frustration happens. So You contact the water department, and let's say you have an older meter in your home, meaning that it doesn't have the electronic devices, it doesn't have the technology where the water department can read it from their office. They actually have to schedule a meter reader to come out to the property and physically read that water meter. Well, that process can take several weeks for you to get scheduled for the meter reader to come out, and then another several weeks for them to process and issue that final water bill. So people say, well, why don't we order the water reading when we list the property? Yeah and no. If the property is occupied, there's a chance you may get the final water read, and by the time you close, that water reading is obsolete. It's best to get it as close to the closing date as possible, and then the water bill can be prorated. So here's an example, right? You list your property in March. You order the final water read. The meter reader comes out in April. You get the bill in May, but you're not closing until June. Now, in June, you have a final water read that you got in May that was read in April. So you're covering a billing cycle from April through June, but there's still usage between April and June. So that meter reading for April is no good in June because you got almost 2 months of usage. So it's best that in this scenario, you contact the water department. You have a closing date of June. They're going to issue a final water bill. Let's say you don't get that water bill until the end of June. Well, simple as this, that's why we have a history of water service, which you can look at, and you can order a water history, and it will show you the read dates. The title company can simply take that information from the final water read, and they can prorate it based on usage. So our parties agree that, hey, the seller, by most contracts, just simply say the seller is only responsible for the water bill through the date of closing. So if you get a final water bill and the service dates start prior to closing and some after closing, then you're just simply going to prorate it up through the date of closing. The title company will pay your portion of that water bill. Now, here's something that's very important. You paid your water bill, let's say in May, you closed in June, and let's say you don't get the final water bill until July. But in between that May date and your June closing, or shortly after June, you receive a standard water bill that doesn't say real estate read on it here, right? So you're going to get you get a regular water bill, and it doesn't have the final real estate read or anything stating that, and you decide you're going to pay this bill. The problem with that is you're going to pay that bill before the final real estate read is processed, and you're going to end up with a credit on this account because you're going to pay, and the title company is going to pay the final water bill, and you're going to end up showing a credit on an account for a property that you no longer own. And guess what? The buyer has already moved into the property and transferred service into their name. So that's an issue because now you have to try to get your money back from the city, which you can do. You just have to show the documentation, closing date, the deed that was transferred to the new buyer, and they'll issue you a refund check. Problem is, it may take several weeks for you to receive that check. So again, once you close as the seller, do not pay any water bills out of pocket unless you think the bill is going to be more than what the title company is holding in escrow. Even then, I would wait until you get that final water read, because oftentimes we would find that your meter reading was actually incorrect. Maybe the water department was sending you an estimated bill every billing cycle. When they actually read that meter, they realize that there were overcharges for several months going to your account. Now they have to adjust it based on the actual reading, and then there's still money sitting in escrow from the title company. So again, do not pay the bill. One of the things that we run across too, I want to be clear about this, is when you look at these bills here, and let's look up at the screen here, account numbers. So if the account number ends in 300, typically that's the homeowner's account, meaning the owner of the property. Anything other than 300 lets us know, or it triggers us to understand that it's probably a third party account. So it may be a tenant account. It may have been multiple tenants that lived in that property. And they each had their own account during the time of their lease. So each person is assigned a new account number. And typically we can tell if it's an owner occupant account or a tenant account based on the last 3 digits. And that may change in the near future because you only can have so many numbers. So what I'm saying is, it's a simple process. It can be frustrating if you're a buyer and you move into a property and you get a water bill that's not yours and it has service dates prior to closing. Do not pay that water bill until you talk to your agent and the title company to make sure you're only paying for your usage as the buyer, because as the buyer, you're only responsible for the water bill from the date of closing and after. Keep that in mind. But it can be confusing here because you have several types of accounts. There may be landlord tenant accounts where the tenant had to put the account in their name during the term of their lease or rental agreement. So again, not a hard process, frustrating sometimes. You'll call the city, one person to tell you one thing and give you a set of instructions. Someone else at the city will tell you something different. Or they'll say, oh, we started, but we need additional documentation. That happens. It's a big city. No problem. You'll get it done eventually. It's the bottom line. But these are some ways where you can make the process a little bit easier. And the best way to make it easier is understanding the process. This is Reginald Perryman with ReggiesRealEstate.com.